Are you a high-performing parent, entrepreneur, or high achiever in pursuit of excellence? Welcome to The Nexus Podcast, a podcast custom tailored for families like ours, driven, affluent, and eager to lead extraordinary lives. From rockstar stay-at-home moms to high-producing CEOs, we choose to model success for everyone we are surrounded by. We prioritize health over sickness, embrace a vitalistic lifestyle, and seek to tap into the limitless potential that God has bestowed upon us. I'm Dr. Daniel Kimbley, your host, and on this podcast, we'll uncover the secrets to living a fulfilling and abundant life, where you and your loved ones can thrive physically, mentally, and spiritually. Together, we'll forge a path to greatness and unleash your God-given capabilities. Get ready to say yes to a life of true prosperity and well-being. This is The Nexus Podcast. Yo, what up, fam? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, and I am your host, Dr. Daniel. So glad you're here. Coming at you live. It's been a minute since I recorded a podcast. I had a queue of a bunch of them, and I'm just stoked to talk about what I have on my mind today. And that thing is this. So I've been having this conversation a lot in the office with people and about the words that we speak and then what words actually do inside of our lives. And this concept isn't something that I came up with on my own. Somebody else came up with it. I can't remember who I heard it from. I believe it was a pastor somewhere at our church, but I can't remember who. So somewhere out there, somebody's going to take the credit for it. And I'm just telling you that it is not me. It's not my original idea, but I'm going to add some sauce to it because I think this is an important concept that can help people heal. And I've had this come up a couple times in the office this week. And so here's my idea is that there's this thought process, and this is what I heard, is that we have words, and we use words that we speak into our lives, and those words have a certain something, which I'll share with you in a second, and then those words do something, like physically do something inside of our lives, and what we do with the words that we speak actually create the reality that we live in. And the reason why this is important, I'll share with you in a second, but we're going to have a conversation about God. We're going to have a conversation about the words you speak. We're also going to have a conversation about agreements that we have, and then what this has to do with the brain and chiropractic in the first place. And so I'll go through the order of these things. And so this is what we think about. It's like we know that the words create our reality. You probably heard people say that before, but what you may not have heard or what you may not have thought about is that every word is a series of letters put together that creates a spelling. So in other words, every word has a spell. Every word has the ability to cast a spell into the world. And so spells create certain things, which we'll talk about next. And so what happens is, like, if we say the words, a word like never, I'll never do that. And I'll talk about agreements in a second, but I'll never do that thing, or I'll never need XYZ, or I'll never, that word never is a very strong word. And there might be a possibility is like, you could say never, but if it came down to it and you had to kill for your family, like you might do that thing, right? If you said like, I will never steal, but it came down to you stealing food to feed your family. I'm not saying this is good, bad, right, or wrong. And I'm not talking, it's not supposed to be a moral conversation. I'm just using this as an example. I'll never steal. But then if it came down to it, is like, if your child was going to die if you didn't steal, would you make that decision to steal? I know some people would say yes, some people would say no, but that word never casts a spell, and it creates a reality of what would happen next and leading up to it. And so spells, each word has a spell. And each of those words that have a spell, I'll talk about words here in just a second again, each of those words that has a spell creates a sentence. So words create sentences. But what's interesting about sentence is, like, yes, sentence is a string of words put together, but what a sentence also is, like if I stole something or I did something illegal and I had to go to court for it, the judge is going to give me a sentence in which I might have to go to jail for a certain amount of time. And so literally, the words we speak cast spells upon our lives, and those spells create sentences that keep us bound. And so when we say things like I can't, or I'll try, or I want, versus a different set of words, which I'll share in a second, like these sentences can literally start to keep us trapped. And so the best example I could give you of this would be me wanting to move to chiropractic school or go to chiropractic school and realizing, like, first semester, I literally thought I was going to fail out. I'm like, I can't do this. It is too hard. I'm going to fail. And I start casting spells and casting sentences on my life. And if I didn't have my wife to help me break those, I would have made agreements with outside forces that did not agree with who I am and what my brain and what my body is capable of, what all of our brains and all of our bodies are capable of, then I literally would have put a sentence on myself that would have kept me from living this life that I just think is so amazing, and I'm so blessed, and I thank God so much to be able to have. And so I'm sharing this with you because I think a lot of times that we don't think about our words. And so if you've ever seen me parent Coco, like Coco will literally be like, Daddy, I can't XYZ. Now, like, we don't say I can't. What do we say instead? We say I'm having trouble doing XYZ. It's a little bit tricky, but I think that I can get it. And so we just start changing her language. We start changing the way that she casts spells and creates sentences for herself, because if she says she can't, that's certainly going to become an agreement that she agrees with and she buys into, and like her physiology and the world around us will literally organize itself in that way. One of the things that I'm starting to learn, this is from a book called Levels of Energy, is that everything has an energy level. And this is all based in the Bible, by the way. This is why the Bible says so many times, do not fear, because fear is a certain low energy level that prevents certain other things from happening in the world. And I won't get into all the like technicality behind the book because I'm not the expert in it. I didn't write it, Frederick Dodson did, but I would encourage you to check it out. It's this book called Levels of Energy. And he talks about this idea of like, when we desire something, when we want something, when we feel like we need something, it actually implies a lack. And if we have a lack mentality towards something, we're actually going to push that thing away. And so it's like, I want a new car, or I need a new car, or Daddy, I'm starving, I need food. It's like, we don't need food. You want food. But even more than that, like if we switch our mindset, so those words are creating a spell, right? And the spell is that I want, I need, I don't have is the implication there. And then on the other hand, it could be like, I like food. I appreciate food. I think that food tastes good. And this switch in the terminology is going to create a different sentence. And if the sentence doesn't imply lack, the thing is more likely to come to you. And there are tons of examples of this. And like I said, I shared the example of me in chiropractic school not believing that I could literally start to like get good grades in some of these classes, chemistry being one of them, anatomy being one of them. And the first year, like it was a really big struggle for me because I didn't have a science background and I was a high school English teacher before. And so here's what really gets interesting, right? Is when we talk about agreements, like we all make agreements. We make agreements every day, all day long. A lot of them are with ourselves. Sometimes it's that I'm not worthy. Sometimes it's that I'm not good enough. I'm not loved. Whatever the agreement is, if you buy into that and you speak those words into your life, whether it's in your head or you're actually physically saying them and you're not aware of the words and the agreements that you're making, you're going to keep yourself stuck. And like, I've seen this plenty of places in my life. I used to be so frustrated with people who had their own businesses who made a lot of money. And the reason that I was is because I was making an agreement that there was something evil about having a business that could serve people and make money. And so because I felt that way, guess what I didn't have? I didn't have money because I agreed that money was evil, even though money's actually not evil at all. And I'm not saying I have a ton of money. I'm just using this as another example to share this idea that when we make agreements with these ideas and with the spells and with the sentences that we create and that we form within our own minds, those create agreements, and those agreements keep us trapped and those agreements keep us locked. Now, I heard this somebody who I've been listening to and following recently. His name's Taylor Welch. He said this thing. He said, we can't see the future, but what we already know is what God says about us is good. And so we have two options. And so when we talk about agreements, like these are the two options, right? You can either do one of two things. One, you can disagree with God and you can hate him, or you can agree with what God's already said about us and you can trust him. And so this brings this idea of like trust and faith and hope and optimism and the words that we speak. And when we start to catch our words and we start to say, I can't, a perfect example of this would be something like this. It's like, I have people come into my office on a day-to-day basis with pain. And while we don't usually see people just for pain, one of the things that will happen is people will walk in and they'll be like, oh my gosh, my knee's so messed up. My knee is just broken. Like I just have this janky knee, or my back is just so jacked up. I'm messed up. I'm hurt. I'm broken. I'm injured. I'm not enough. Like all these words come up. Those are all spells that people are creating agreements with, and the fact that they're broken. And I always want to break this idea because like thinking about pain in the first place, pain is there as a way to get your body to stop doing something so that your body can actually start to heal itself. But most people just go on, they ignore the pain, they ignore the symptoms, they ignore the thing, whatever it is. This is not just a pain conversation, by the way. And then what happens is they make agreements that they keep telling themselves that I'm broken, I'm injured, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, etc., etc., etc. And the pain continues to show up day after day after day after day, even when we're adjusting them, even when we're waking up the brain. And so this is where it becomes important that the words that we speak create our reality. The words that we speak create spells, and those spells create sentences, and those sentences create agreements in our lives. And until we break those agreements, those false agreements that we had, nothing will be the same. I'll give you a perfect example of this in my life. For the longest time, I was raised by my dad to not necessarily be family oriented. Like, there was a lot of darkness on his side of the family and a lot of trauma, and there's some amazing family members in there. So if they're watching, like, just know I'm not talking about you, but I think in general there was just a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma and things that I will never know or never understand. And thank God for my dad for doing that. But one of the things my dad raised me to do is he's like, you can do it all by yourself. Like, you don't need to ask anybody for help. You don't need to be around family. And I was raised to literally have this pride and this sense of ego and this sense of attachment to, like, I don't need anybody. I don't need anybody to help me. I'm never going to ask for help. I don't need anyone to support me. I don't need a wife. I don't need a spouse. I don't need a girlfriend. I don't need friends, because guess what? I'm good. I can figure it all out on my own. My question, though, that has come up recently as I start looking back over the course of my life is like, where did that leave space for God? And it didn't. It literally didn't. And guess what? I disagreed with what God said about me, and I didn't trust him. I actually hated him. And so as a result of doing that, my agreements allowed me to live in a place where my life was just okay and not magnificent. And magnificent has nothing to do with money. It's literally an internal feeling, because I already know that God looks at me the same way that he looked at Jesus. And this is all throughout the Bible. You can look it up on your own, but God looked at me the same way he looked at Jesus, created in his image, right? And so this idea that, like, the agreements that I made have completely changed. And as the agreements that I made have completely changed, and what I'm happy with and what I trust for now, and the words that I speak and the agreements and the sentences that I created in my life have totally changed. And it's unbound all these things. And Heather and I have seen amazing fruit in our lives, even in light of lots of death recently, and lots of darkness and lots of destruction and destroying old patterns and stress and, like, things trying to come and attack us. And, like, it's all been so good, though, because it's allowed us to grow. So I'm talking about this, and I'm probably rambling at this point, but the idea is this, is that the words that you speak are going to keep you trapped, to keep you hostage, or you're going to start to trust God, and you're going to start to change the words that you speak so that the agreements change. And when the agreements change, I guarantee your physical life will change. Mine has. I have tons of evidence of this. Throughout. Like, we could go back when I believed that I could actually go to chiropractic school and move to California and start my own practice. Everybody told me I was crazy. I couldn't do it, including family members. And guess what? Here we are. We're doing it. It's been amazing. So the coolest part about this is, like, this is not to prop me up, right? But it's that I had a trust, and I made an agreement with myself that I could do it, and I was worthy to do it, and I was able to do it. And guess what? Couldn't have done it without God. So it actually wasn't about me, but I had to learn that lesson later in life. So here's the interesting part. The question becomes, like, okay, that's great, Dr. Daniel, but what does that have to do with chiropractic? Well, here's what it has to do with chiropractic, is that building your faith requires a strong frontal cortex of your brain. Yes, I will say this again. Building your faith requires a strong frontal cortex of your brain. So what does that mean? Your prefrontal cortex, amongst a bunch of other things that I will not get into on this episode, is responsible for your faith. It's responsible for your hope. It's responsible for your optimism. It's responsible for your positive outlook. It's responsible for the words that you speak and the way you think about the world. It's responsible for modulating what happens in your brainstem, whether you're looking for scary things or looking for positive things and looking for opportunities and looking for things that are going to make you grateful and make you happy. And the words that we speak are impacted by the state of our brain. So every time, here's what's so interesting, right? Is like every time we speak negative words, or every time we think negative thoughts, or every time we hear, this is where it gets really interesting, is every time we hear negative thoughts or we hear negative words, that triggers our body to have a physiology that releases stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine. Cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine act on the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Cortisol specifically shrinks the cells of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So when that happens, what happens is literally we're turning off the part of our brain that is responsible for more faith, more hope, and more optimism. And we put ourselves in a cycle of speaking more negative words and creating new sentences inside of our lives and creating new negative agreements inside of our lives, and it becomes a cycle where people get stuck. And so a lot of times, like why this came up in the office this week is like I've seen some people who are having trouble breaking past the barrier. Like they're like, my anxiety, amazing. I'm sleeping, amazing. Thought process, amazing. Energy, amazing. Back pain, still there. Somewhere, there are still agreements. Energy, amazing. Headaches, gone. Neck pain, still there. Because there are still agreements there. And so I'm sharing this with you as just another way to start to become your own best doctor. Because the reality is every single person that we sit down with inside of our office, we start with one thing and one thing only, and that is this, is that your body inside of you, your brain and the body that God gave you, is the best healer. There is no doctor out there who can fix you. There is no doctor out there who can cure you. There's no medication out there that can cure you. It all is what's happening inside of your brain and what you believe about your life and what you believe to be true about you and what God has already said about you. And the coolest part of it is like you already have it. It's already within you. Nobody's smarter than that. There is no human being on the planet that is smarter than the trillions of processes that are happening inside of your body every single second without you having to give any thought to. And so the idea is that as we adjust people, as we wake up the frontal cortex of the brain, as we turn off the flood of stress hormones, we start to allow the body to have more optimism. And then we can layer that on with creating new spells for our lives and breaking old sentences and creating more positive, uplifting sentences that are going to create new agreements inside of our lives and agreements with what God has already said about us and already promised us. And then that allows us to make a decision to have more trust. And when we have more trust, it builds our faith. And when we have more faith, new things come. And those new things allow us to even have more trust and then build more faith. And what happens is you start to level up. And I see this happening with me in my life. I see it happening with Coco and her life. I see it happening with Heather and her life. And there's so many people that we get the opportunity and like the biggest privilege ever to take care of inside of our lives. But it starts with addressing and acknowledging what God gave you, which is this amazing, powerful brain that is capable of things that you can't even imagine, that humans can't even imagine. We can wrap our brains around 10% of what it's actually capable of. So my friends, I hope you got some value out of this episode. My question for you is this, is like, where are you casting spells? Where are you casting sentences in your life or in the lives of others? And what can you do today? What one step could you take today to start to wake up your front part of your brain, to get it firing more differently so that you can express and experience a different level of life? I love you. I appreciate you. I will come at you again next week. Peace.